A man born in America built Jamaica's entire money system, made reggae music famous worldwide, became best friends with an American president, and died on his own birthday at age 89. Edward Seaga came into this world in Boston on May 28, 1930. His dad was from Lebanon and had big dreams in America, but those dreams crashed when the stock market fell apart. Baby Edward was only 3 months old when his family packed everything and moved to Jamaica. His mom was Jamaican with mixed blood, African, Scottish, and Indian all flowing through her veins. Little Edward grew up in this island paradise, but he wasn't just playing on beaches. He went to one of the best schools in Kingston called Wolmer's Boys' School. This kid did everything. He played cricket, swam in pools, shot rifles, played tennis, and still got amazing grades. When other boys his age were just trying to pass tests, Edward was already thinking about big problems like why some people stay poor while others get rich. Then something incredible happened. Edward got into Harvard University, one of the best schools in the whole world. Most people from Jamaica never even dream of going there. But Edward didn't just go to Harvard, he crushed it. He studied how people live, how societies work, and why things are the way they are. He played sports for Harvard too, soccer and cricket and rifle shooting. In 1952, he walked out of Harvard with his degree, and everyone expected him to get a fancy job and make lots of money. But Edward had different plans. When he came back to Jamaica, this Harvard graduate did something nobody expected. He disappeared into the poorest, roughest neighborhoods in Jamaica. He lived with people who had almost nothing. He slept where they slept, ate what they ate, and listened to their stories. Imagine a guy with a Harvard degree choosing to live in tin shacks with no running water, no electricity, just to understand how poor people really live. He sat on dirt floors, went to their churches, recorded their songs, and became part of their world. He wanted to feel poverty, not just study it from books. This changed everything about how Edward saw Jamaica. He realized that fixing poverty wasn't about throwing money at problems. It was about understanding what people actually needed and building systems that worked for them. During this time, Edward fell in love with Jamaican music. He started recording the raw, real music that poor people made. Then he did something crazy. He started a record company called West Indies Records Limited. Before Edward's company, if you were a Jamaican musician, you had to send your music to other countries to get it made into records. That cost a fortune. Edward built the first recording studio in Jamaica that could do everything right there on the island. Suddenly, local artists could record their music and turn it into records without leaving home. Through his record company, Edward helped create the sound that would become reggae. He worked with artists who were building something totally new, mixing African rhythms with American jazz and Caribbean soul. In 1962, when he decided to go into politics full-time, he had to sell his company. But his love for music never died. Years later, when he was Prime Minister, he gave Bob Marley, the king of reggae, one of Jamaica's highest honors. At that time, some fancy people in Jamaica looked down on reggae as ghetto music, but Edward knew better. He knew Bob Marley was spreading Jamaica's name across the whole world. In 1959, a powerful man named Alexander Bustamante noticed this young guy who kept writing smart things in newspapers. Bustamante was a legend, one of the fathers of independent Jamaica. He invited 29-year-old Edward to join his party and gave him a seat in the government. Edward became the youngest person in Jamaica's government, and he gave a speech that people still talk about today. He said his job was to pull up the poor without pulling down the rich. What he meant was simple. Jamaica didn't have much money. If you took from the rich and gave to the poor, everyone would still be broke. Instead, the country needed to make more money and make sure everyone got a fair share. This idea would guide everything Edward did for the next 50 years. In 1962, Jamaica became independent. No more British control. It was a brand new country. Edward ran for Parliament and won a seat representing West Kingston. This wasn't a fancy neighborhood. It was the waterfront area where poor people, dock workers, small traders, and struggling families lived. Most politicians didn't want anything to do with West Kingston. Too poor, too rough, too many problems. But Edward won that seat and then kept winning it again and again. For 43 straight years, he represented West Kingston, 10 elections in a row. Nobody in Caribbean history has ever matched that record. That kind of loyalty doesn't happen by accident. Right away, Edward became Minister of Development and Welfare. His first big project showed the world what kind of leader he was. There was a terrible slum called Back Owal in West Kingston. Horrible conditions, no proper houses, crime everywhere. Edward tore it all down and built a completely new community called Tivoli Gardens. Suddenly, families who had lived in dirt and darkness had real houses with running water and electricity. Kids had schools. There were community centers and parks. For many people, Tivoli Gardens was proof that Edward really cared about poor people. But there's another side to this story. Tivoli Gardens became known as a political stronghold where Edward's party controlled everything. Some people say it became the first garrison community where politics and crime got mixed together. Violence became part of the area's story. Years later, terrible shootings happened there. People still argue about whether Edward created something good or something dangerous. From 1967 to 1972, Edward became Minister of Finance. This is where he built the foundation of modern Jamaica. He created the Jamaica Mortgage Bank so regular families could buy houses instead of renting forever. He created the Students' Loan Bureau so poor kids could go to university. Before this, only rich families could afford higher education. He built the National Development Bank to help businesses grow. He started the Jamaica Stock Exchange in 1969 so people could invest and own shares in companies. He created the Agricultural Credit Bank to help farmers. Every single thing you need to run a modern economy, Edward built it. 50 years later, these banks and institutions still exist. Millions of Jamaicans use them every day without even knowing they exist because of one man's vision. Edward also pushed something called Jamaicanization. Basically, lots of big businesses in Jamaica were owned by foreigners in America or Britain. All the profits left Jamaica. Edward helped transfer these businesses into Jamaican hands. More money stayed in Jamaica. More Jamaicans became business owners. It was about building local power instead of always depending on foreigners. In 1974, Edward became leader of his party, the Jamaica Labour Party. The 1970s were scary times in Jamaica. The other party, led by Michael Manley, was in power and moving toward socialism. They were getting friendly with Cuba and the Soviet Union. This was during the Cold War when America and Russia were enemies. Jamaica got caught in the middle. Political fights became actual fights. Different neighborhoods became war zones. Things got so bad that in 1976, the government declared a state of emergency. Then came 1980, and the election that year was like a war. Almost 800 people died from political violence. 800 dead bodies because of politics. Families destroyed, communities torn apart, blood in the streets. It was one of the darkest times in Jamaica's history. Edward's party won that 1980 election big time. 51 out of 60 seats in Parliament. At age 50, Edward Seaga became Jamaica's 5th Prime Minister. The country he inherited was a mess. The economy was falling apart. Prices were rising crazy fast. The country was running out of foreign money. Edward had to rebuild everything from scratch. His plan was simple. Forget socialism, bring in capitalism, open Jamaica for business. Make foreign companies want to invest. get loans from international banks. It was a total reversal of everything the previous government had done. Here's where Edward's story gets really interesting. In January 1981, just weeks after becoming Prime Minister, Edward became the first foreign leader to visit the new American President Ronald Reagan at the White House. First one. Before any European leader, before any major power. Why? Because Reagan and Edward were like brothers. Both believed in capitalism. Both hated communism. Both took power at almost the same time. They genuinely liked each other. Reagan promised to help Jamaica, and he kept his promise. American money poured into Jamaica like never before. By 1983, Jamaica was the third biggest receiver of American aid per person in the entire world, after only Egypt and Israel. The World Bank tripled their loans to Jamaica. Edward and Reagan had dinners together, gave speeches praising each other, and built a friendship that went beyond politics. In April 1982, Reagan visited Jamaica. The warmth between them was obvious to everyone watching. They toasted each other like old friends. Edward got a special medal called the American Friendship Medal for promoting democracy. When America invaded the island of Grenada in 1983 after a communist takeover, Edward sent Jamaican troops to help. Not everyone agreed with that invasion, but Edward stood with Reagan no matter what. Edward also knew Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister. They got along most of the time because both believed in conservative economics. But they fought sometimes too about issues like South Africa and Grenada. Back in Jamaica, Edward's 9 years as Prime Minister brought big changes. He completely changed the tax system, creating things like the TRN number that every Jamaican worker has now, and the GCT tax. He made the Constitution stronger, adding protections for people's rights and creating an office called the Public Defender to protect citizens from government abuse. He loved Jamaican culture and worked hard to make ska and reggae music respected worldwide, but not everything worked perfectly. The national debt grew a lot during Edward's time. Critics argued that while he brought in foreign investment, regular Jamaicans didn't see enough benefits. The garrison politics continued and maybe got worse. There were always rumors about politicians having connections with gang leaders. One controversy happened when Edward attended the funeral of a man named Jim Brown, who people said was connected to gangs. His critics said this proved politicians and criminals were too close. His supporters said he was just representing his community like any politician does. In February 1989, Jamaica held another election. This time, Michael Manley's party won. Edward lost power after 9 years. Edward became opposition leader, the head of his party, but not in government. He stayed in that position for 16 years until 2005. Most politicians would have quit after a few years out of power. Not Edward. He kept fighting, kept representing West Kingston, kept leading his party through years of losing. In 2005, after 46 years in politics, Edward finally retired at age 75. He was the last politician left from before Jamaica's independence in 1962. The University of the West Indies immediately made him a distinguished fellow. In 2010, he became Chancellor of the University of Technology. He wrote 2 big books about his life and Jamaica's history. He went back to studying Jamaican folklore and culture, his first love from his Harvard days. Edward's personal life had drama too. In 1965, when he was 35, he married Marie Elizabeth Constantine, known as Mitzi, who had just won Miss Jamaica 1965. They had 3 children, Christopher, Andrew, and Annabella. For 30 years, Mitzi stood beside Edward through everything. But in 1995, they divorced. Then, in 1996, at age 66, Edward married again. His new wife was Carla Seaga, and she worked on social projects and Jamaican crafts. In 2002, when Edward was 72 years old, Carla had their daughter Gabrielle. Becoming a father at 72 is rare. Most men that age are grandfathers. But Edward got to raise another child with all the wisdom of age. People talk about Edward having a hidden fortune, but the truth is less exciting. His wealth was probably around $7 to $10 million. That's not small money, but for someone who was prime minister and in politics for almost 50 years, it's actually not that much. He owned a resort property called Enchanted Gardens. His money came from his political salary, his old record business, and property investments. There's no real evidence of huge secret wealth. Edward received many honors during his life. Jamaica gave him the Order of the Nation in 2002, one of the country's highest awards. 4 American universities gave him honorary doctoral degrees. Venezuela, Germany, and South Korea gave him medals. In 2018, Jamaica named a major highway after him. Edward Seaga died on May 28, 2019, his 89th birthday. He died in Miami, where he was getting medical treatment. His body came back to Jamaica with full military honors. He lay in state so people could pay respects. Parliament held a special meeting where even his political enemies praised him. On June 23, 2019, he was buried at National Heroes Park, where Jamaica's greatest leaders rest. Edward's legacy divides people. His supporters say he saved Jamaica from communism, built the financial system that made modern Jamaica possible, and put Jamaican culture on the world map. They point to all the banks and institutions he created that still help millions today. His critics say he started garrison politics and political violence, made Jamaica too dependent on America, and increased debt without helping poor people enough. Some Jamaicans say he saved the country. Others say he damaged it. Both groups have their points. The truth is, Edward Seaga was complicated. He was a Harvard genius who lived in slums, a record producer who became prime minister, a man who held one poor community's trust for 43 years, a leader who walked with world powers, a father at 72, a man who died completing exactly 89 years of life on his birthday. Modern Jamaica, good and bad, carries his fingerprints everywhere. Every bank transaction, every student loan, every reggae song played worldwide connects back to what he built. If you want to understand how one person can completely reshape a nation's destiny, and why Caribbean politics still operates the way it does today, smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which leader from your country changed everything. Because Edward Seaga's story proves that one determined person really can transform millions of lives forever.